Now, I'm not much of a magician, but in this video I'm going to show you how you can reduce the noise in your images the generic way. So we're not going to use any artificial intelligence special software. We're going to do everything in Photoshop. Now, whenever you find yourself in a situation where you have to keep a high ISO and things are static, so for instance, if you're shooting with a closed down aperture and it's not very bright outside, you need to bump up that ISO and things are static, well, you can take multiple shots with that high ISO. You can even raise it quite high actually. And then you take multiple shots just like you would do when you're focus stacking in your woodland photography or in your landscape photography, or if you're exposure bracketing, you need to have the same framing and things are not allowed to move in the frame. Now, for noise reduction, you do it the same way as with that. So basically you take multiple 5, 10, maybe 20 photographs of the same framing, and the only thing that's changing from frame to frame or from photograph to photograph is the noise, because everything else is pretty much still and static. Then if you import all those images as layers into one Photoshop document, you combine everything together into one smart object, and then you use the smart object stacking function mean. Basically what that does, Photoshop looks at the images on a pixel level, and everything that's changing from frame to frame or from layer to layer, from photograph to photograph, well, that's going to be averaged out. So everything that was static in the shot is going to remain there, and everything that was changing on the pixel level, well, that's going to be basically erased. Photoshop is going to average out the pixels from all of the shots. Therefore, if you have more photographs, you will get a cleaner image. So 5, maybe 10 photographs are really kind of needed to actually make this thing work. And you end up with a result which started like this, and you made it into something that looks like this. Now, even the small details that were not visible on each frame, if you average out the noise, all those little details become visible now, because in every frame, that detail is represented a little bit differently. So noise is covering certain portions of details, but since you have so many frames, that noise is not always in the same place. So when Photoshop averages out those pixels and gets rid of the noise, you only end up with the information of those small details. And this is the magic. You can create really detailed photographs even if you were shooting with a very high ISO and you got a lot of noise in your shots. The only limitation, of course, is that everything needs to be static in the frame. So for fast sports photography with high ISOs, well, that's not going to work because, every frame in a burst shot is going to be a little bit different. I also need to mention that you have to align the images. So the images need to be perfectly aligned one on top of the other so that Photoshop recognizes what's not moving and what is moving in each frame. Now, one practical scenario for using this is when you're doing astrophotography. Typically with astrophotography, you're limited either with your shutter speed if you follow the 500 rule, so 500 divided by the focal length of a full-frame camera that you're shooting. That's the longest shutter speed or exposure time that you can use before stars actually start to streak. They are no longer dots. And therefore, you're compensating with a higher ISO value. Of course, I have to mention that having a lens with a wider open aperture, so a very fast lens, is going to bring you a far way. But you're always limited with a higher ISO. So it's kind of hard to take astro photographs with your base ISO of whatever camera you're using. So what you can do is you can speed up the shutter speed maybe to 10 or 5 seconds, raise the ISO quite high, and take multiple shots. Then the only task that you're left with is to align the images together based upon where the stars are. Now you can do this automatically or you can do this manually. With stars, it's a little bit difficult because Photoshop has trouble recognizing what are the subject, what are the objects in the frame, and it has trouble distinguishing stars from noise. So you need to align this basically by just taking out a very small piece of your canvas and aligning maybe just 3 stars in all of the frames and then uncrop everything back to get the full image. And for the foreground, you're just going to take a part of the foreground from one image. So you don't need to stack all of that. You can take a very long exposure or a very crisp, low ISO shot of the foreground and then separate shots of the stars and then just compose everything together in Photoshop. But with this technique, when you're averaging out the noise of the stars, you really make those stars shine because they are always the same and the noise is always changing. So you're distinguishing noise from stars by just allowing Photoshop to look at the motion of the noise. Therefore, it recognizes that and distinguishes it from the stars. Now, that's one really practical use of this technique. So I hope you guys found this video interesting. I hope you've learned something new. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you aren't subscribed already, and give me a comment in the comment section. I would love to answer all of your questions. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.